Good evening. My name is Trudi Sandmeier, and I'm the Director of the Heritage Conservation here in the School of Architecture. And I am excited to be able to welcome you to this 100-year celebration of USC Women in Architecture. Interestingly enough, I'm not actually an architect, but I am a woman, so I feel that maybe that's my big qualification. And I think the heritage aspect of this might also be a hook. So I think that's how I got involved in all of this. I do want to thank the lecture committee of the school for promoting this event and making it a part of this semester's lecture program. And to all of our speakers in advance, I want to thank you all for coming and making time to be here and to be a part of this. We really appreciate you spending that time and coming back to support the school. What I want to also say is that this is not a conversation about women faculty. This is not a conversation about all of the different aspects of women in architecture in Los Angeles. This is specifically a conversation about the alumnae of the School of Architecture and their role here. And so we really wanted to focus very narrowly. Our hope is that this is the first of many conversations about the role of women in the School of Architecture, and that this will be the beginning of a series of dialogues about the contributions to the school. This sort of came about in part because the university and the school have been doing a lot of looking back over the last year, celebrating our legacy. And in the course of that, and in the course of the research that's being done, what became clear is that there isn't a whole lot of scholarship that's been done about the ladies that have come through the doors of the school. And that seems really surprising to me. Certainly in my field in heritage conservation, it's really dominated by women. And in fact, I was so struck by this, I did a little digging around, and currently, of the 13 major positions at the federal, state, and local level in heritage conservation, there are only 3 men. The rest are women. So to me, I thought, well, why aren't we talking about the ladies? Wow, what's happening here? Turns out there's some different statistics in architecture. And there was just recently a conference that the AIA LA hosted about women in architecture that was really an amazing group talking about contemporary practice and what's going on. But the statistics are a little bit different. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about what we do know. Tonight is going to be a couple of different steps are going to happen. So after my introduction, I'm going to invite Ruth up here to talk a little bit about the early history of women in the school. And then we're going to have a panel with some of our alumnae who have come back, whose times here at the school range from 1960 to the 90s. And we wanted to sort of talk about the different eras in the school and what's going on. So a little bit about it. This was the first female architecture graduate, Doris Johnson, in 1927. She was the vice president of her class. There were only 6 people in her class, so that was pretty great. This was one of her drawings. We did a little digging around to find some information. Ruth's going to go further into that. Here's Peggy Phillips, one of the early graduates from 36. We went through yearbooks to see if we could find some good photos of people. It was more challenging than you might think. We had to put this in here because she looks great, don't you think? Oh yeah, it's hard to see, sorry. Whose graduation photos look like that? I mean, really, come on. That's a yearbook picture. There's Harriet from 1946. And this gives you a sense, we found this in the archives as well, this gives you a sense of how many women there were from the beginning until 1951. That's it. It's not a lot of people. Things get better in the 50s. We get up to 10 women at one time. Woohoo! Then 1969, it's a bonanza. We have 140 women in the school in 1969, and then it only goes up from there. This is 1974, and you may recognize some familiar faces in this picture. But you can see there are some women scattered throughout here, some of whom you will meet tonight. The first president of the Architectural Guild was a woman, Dorian Hunter, in the 70s. And then we get to the later years to where there's lots and lots of women. And then currently, the statistics from 2014 are that 51.5% of the undergraduate students are women and 57.7% of the graduate students. Now, the grad students number is a little bit misleading because that includes all 4 disciplines, not just architecture, but all 4 disciplines within the school. So I think that number might be slightly different, but honestly, I didn't have time to sort it all out. So you'll just have to imagine what that number might be. But nonetheless, I think it is significant that now women are the majority in the school, certainly at the undergrad level. So now I want to take the opportunity to welcome, to talk about some of her research that she has done, Ruth Wallach, who is an author and is the current director of the Arts and Humanities Libraries here at USC, and most importantly, is a graduate of the Heritage Conservation Program from 2013. Holy cow. Total Freudian slip. All right. So with that, I would like to invite Ruth up to talk a little bit about what she found.
My name is Ruth, and I am indeed with the University Libraries. I'm very happy to see you here. Students, thank you very much for coming. Faculty as well, thank you for the support. We have alumni, of course our panelists are, and we have a few alumni scattered in the back. We have an alum of the Industrial Design program at the School of Architecture here, and other interested people. And this is part of the centennial celebration of architectural studies at USC, counting from 1914, a year after I graduated, up to the present day. 2 years ago, I found myself short by 1 unit of the minimum required to graduate with a master's in heritage conservation. So Trudi suggested that I look into finding information about early female graduates in architecture. And the idea was very interesting to me because I knew from experience that researching or even gathering information about ordinary people's lives is a very difficult proposition. It seems like it shouldn't be, but it is. So I said yes. And devoted fall of 2013 semester to trying to get spring, trying to gather some information. I was able to trace some information on women, starting with 1927, and let me see if, starting with Doris Johnson, up to about the 1960s. Like all ordinary mortals, I did a lot of Googling, which was not terribly helpful, but had to be done. I looked in the Daily Trojan, the digitized Daily Trojan that the USC libraries have, the El Rodeo yearbook. The most helpful resource for the early years in particular were the society pages of the Los Angeles Times, marriage announcements, and a few other interesting articles which traced some of these women. Not all of them went into architecture. In fact, many of them did not. They married, they became housewives, mothers, joined the PTA. Some of them became teachers, but some of them practiced. So I'll give examples of some of these women's lives a little bit as an introduction. So Doris Johnson graduated, as stated here, in May of 1927. She was the first woman to receive a BA in architecture. And upon graduation, she married a fellow architecture student with a very Edith Wharton-like name of Robert Van Buren Livingston. And so she became Mrs. R. Van Buren Livingston. So it's very important that her parents placed an announcement in the LA Times. And the wedding announcement said that the happy couple will be sailing to Europe to study architecture in Italy, France, and Germany, and coming back to Los Angeles in winter. Some years later, there was an article about Mrs. R. Van Buren Livingston designing the couple's home in South Pasadena. So she continued doing some work, at least for some time. She graduated in 1927. The next woman graduate was Peggy Phillips. We saw a photograph of hers earlier, and that was in 1936. So there was a gap for graduation. She married a guy named Franklin Kent Galloway, who was a graduate of UCLA. And she became Peggy Galloway. 13 years after she graduated, in 1949, the Los Angeles Times had an article titled "Home Design by a Housewife." And it was about the home that she designed for the family. She was described as the housewife and a designer, a felicitous combination, because she got to design a home that she would be using as a housewife, or something to that extent. She was also listed as being an associate of Paul Frankel. At that time, we did not have the book on Paul Frankel that came out recently, so I didn't get a chance to see if she's actually listed there. 2 years later, there were two interesting women graduates. That's in 1938. Malvern Coates Ensign came to USC from Arizona, from Phoenix. She got her BA in architecture, and upon graduation went back to Phoenix. And she married a local architect there whose name was Ora Marcus. Malvern seems to have been a Lucy Stoner, and this is a historic reference to a suffragette, a mid-19th century American suffragette named Lucy Stone, who was the first American woman to legally not have changed her name upon marriage. So after that, for decades and into the 20th century, women who did that, who retained legally their maiden name after marriage, were called Lucy Stoners. So from what I could determine, Malvern Coates Ensign remained that. She was a licensed architect. Googling her name was very helpful for once, in part because she designed quite a bit in the Phoenix and Glendale area. She appears to have shared an office with her husband, but had projects of her own. The same year, another woman graduated from USC, and this was a very sad case. Her name was Ruth, just like mine, Ruth Schneider. She came from the University of Washington. She transferred. She followed her husband, A. Quincy Jones, so she was actually Ruth Schneider Jones. She graduated a year after him in 1938. Cory Buchner, in her book about A. Quincy Jones, mentions her twice. She says they married in 1937. The following year, they designed two houses, their residence and one other, intended as income property. And then later on, Cory Buchner says, building two separate residences, they build them on the same property. Building two separate residence structures, provided ideal. In 1942, Jones's marriage to Schneider ended. So I thought, she was married to A. Quincy Jones. I should be able to find information about her. Well, no, I did not. In her email to me, Cory Buchner speculated that Ruth Schneider maybe went back to Washington and practiced there, and I didn't have access to licensed historic resources for Washington that are available through their university, so I let go of that. That's possible. I decided to look in A. Quincy Jones's obituaries. There were many obituaries once he died, given his stature as an architect. They all, I can't claim I've looked through all of them, but I looked through many. They all listed two wives, the widow, Elaine, and the ex-wife, Anne, neither one of whom was named Ruth. If you Google Ruth Schneider Jones in quotation marks, which is a way to Google a phrase, you will find the same sentence from a Wikipedia article about A. Quincy Jones repeated everywhere, which mentions her name. I mean, it says nothing, basically, that they were married. So it is a sad case of Ruth Schneider-Jones. And if any of you are thinking about potential thesis topics, not about her specifically, but just in general, researching women in architecture, especially if you're interested in USC, there are quite a few possibilities there. As I went closer to us in time into the 1960s, it became even harder to do research on women graduates. In part because the Los Angeles Times had many more marriage announcements. Everybody started placing their marriage announcements, just in general. Relatively speaking, USC graduates placed fewer marriage announcements, so it wasn't a good avenue anymore. And unless these women were promoted to be department heads or worked on very large projects, it was almost impossible to sort of quickly scan the informational horizon to see what happened to them. So this is another area, the post-World War II area, time period is an interesting area to research in terms of what women did. I looked into some faculty, female faculty. I had to be careful with this. Sometime, I think around 1925, the Department of Architecture and the Department of Fine Arts became one administrative unit, and they were together for decades. And it so happens that in fine arts, there were many more women students and female faculty from the early days onward than in architecture. So I had to make sure that I was concentrating on architecture. From what I could determine, there were no women teaching until the 1960s. I may be wrong, another area for research. But sometime in the mid to late 1960s, there were several female lecturers, meaning that they were brought to teach specific courses. They were not on tenure track. They didn't stay permanently. Claire Forrest was listed in the late 1970s architecture catalog, which is in the university archives, as being an assistant professor of architecture, which to me means that she was on tenure track. However, she was killed in a car accident in Scotland in 1976, so that was that. In 1981, Ena Dubnoff, who is one of our panelists, was hired as probably or possibly the first tenure track position for a woman at USC. She left a few years later. And then Diane Girardo was hired in 1984 into a tenure track position, and she received tenure in 1988. She still teaches architectural history and specializing in anything having to do with women's spaces in the Renaissance Ferrara up to architecture in Italy under Mussolini, so quite a wide range. I spoke to her on the phone some years back, and those of you who know Diane or taken her courses know she does not mince words in any way, shape, or form. But I will just say very politely that she told me that her tenure case was very difficult. She used other terms, which cannot be repeated, and that the university noted at the time that the tenure committee had no women on it. I also interviewed several other female faculty, a few of whom came here as students, graduated, and then later came back to teach. For these women, it was interesting that their memories of being students were very different than their memories of being faculty for a variety of reasons. I mean, some of it, of course, you're a student, you're a faculty, your responsibilities are different, but they remembered being the time of their being students as very exciting time, heady times, the intellectual growth. They also remembered the overt chauvinism that they experienced, but they brushed it off very often because it was so exciting to be a student. So one of them remembered talking to a counselor who recommended that she actually study fine arts because it was more copacetic to a woman. Another remembered that during a juried review of student work, a faculty member said, "We all know that women cannot be architects, but it is amusing to watch them try." When these women were hired some years later to teach, their experience was very different. They were very much invested in teaching and the excitement of producing the next generation of architects. They also had family issues children, whatever. And as we know to this day, women do carry a larger burden. And of course, back in the 1970s and 1980s, it was much more so. Women carry a larger burden of family life. And they felt they had no support for the writing and research, which are the hallmarks of tenure-track positions. To cycle back to the early women graduates, I was in the university archives looking at some files about the School of Architecture, and I came upon a sheet from 2001 that listed the early women graduates, and it was obvious this was somebody who was trying to do research on early women graduates. Now, Doris Johnson was not the first woman listed on that sheet. A woman named Greta, with 2 T's, Vera Gray, was listed as having graduated from USC in 1916 with a BA, and the note said she practiced, later became an architect. Well, I got really excited. This is, a few years after I was doing this research, but I immediately forgot what I was in the university archives for, and I decided I'll look up this Greta Vera Gray and see if I can figure out what she was. So according to the El Rodeo, she did graduate in 1916 from the College of Liberal Arts, and it didn't say what her studies were. I can only assume that she took architectural courses. She seems to have married an architect with a very Baroque name of Abelardo Lafuente Garcia Rojo, who was considerably older than she was by at least 20 years, if not more so. And he practiced architecture in Manila and in Shanghai. In fact, he designed a bunch of civic buildings in the European manner in Shanghai. In 1927, she came back to Los Angeles from China because there was quite a bit of political unrest in China. Her husband stayed behind, and he died in 1931. And then she kind of disappeared. There was a very cryptic article in the Los Angeles Times where she either took the county to court, or the county took her to court over support of elderly parents. So I don't know if she supported or didn't support them, something very strange. And then I found traces of her teaching in a junior high school in this area. But I could not tell whether she practiced architecture. Abelardo Lafuente Garcia Rojo has a Wikipedia article, which means he's immortal, and it does describe his architectural achievements, but there is no mention of family at all. Another topic for research, I suppose. So this is, in a nutshell, kind of examples of some of the information that I was able to unearth once upon a time for a miserable 1 unit that did allow me to graduate, thankfully. So, and I will turn the podium back to Trudi.
Well, I tell you, you have to work hard for those units, for sure. Okay. All right, so now I'd like to introduce the panelists. I'm just going to get everybody's information all together, and then we'll invite them up to the stage, and we'll have a little panel discussion talking about their experiences here. So I'll start with Ena Dubnoff. Ena Dubnoff received her Bachelor of Architecture in 1960 from USC, graduating cum laude and earning an AIA Medal for Excellence in Architecture. At Columbia University, she earned a master's degree in urban design and was awarded a Willliam Kinne Fellows traveling fellowship, which allowed her to travel widely and to spend a year in India. She established her own practice in 1984, and her focus has been designing multifamily housing for low-income households and projects for providers of social services for local communities. She is a founding partner of One Company, a partnership of 4 women started to develop affordable housing with a multitude of projects in Los Angeles and Oregon. Dubnoff has lectured extensively and been a faculty member at the University of Southern California. Southern California Institute of Architecture, and Penn State University. So here's a few of her projects. Next we have Christine Lampert. Christine Lampert is a principal with her own firm, Lampert Diaz Architects, located in San Clemente, California. Her professional practice includes commercial, retail, school, and government projects, banks, libraries, custom residential, senior housing, community centers, adult daycare facilities, historic rehabilitations, and master planning projects. So I'm not sure if she left anything off that list. It's pretty impressive. She's also the Senior Associate Director of Architecture for UDP International in Hong Kong, an international master planning firm with an architecture division in Hong Kong. She's served as an adjunct faculty member for several institutions, including USC. Follow the arrow. Therese Gain graduated from USC in 1974. She's the Director of Facilities for the Fremont Unified School District. Ms. Gain oversees all of the facility planning and construction activities of the district. The district maintains 42 school sites for 33,000 students in kindergarten through 12th grade, plus some preschool and adult school programs. Ms. Gain is currently overseeing the district's implementation of a $650 million bond program to construct health and safety, technology, and general modernization improvements throughout the district. The district's construction program also includes the addition of new classroom buildings and the conversion of 5 junior high school campuses to middle schools. The construction of a developer-built elementary school is also currently in the planning stages. Kelly Sutherland McLeod, FAIA, graduated from the School of Architecture with a B.Arch degree in 1983. She established her own firm, Kelly Sutherland McLeod Architecture, in 1988 and has been recognized by the AIA, the California Preservation Foundation, the Los Angeles Conservancy, and the California Governor's the California Governor with a Historic Preservation Award. The project architect for the nationally recognized Gamble House Conservation Project, and for the restoration of the Japanese house. There she is up on the roof, the Gamble House, don't tell. And for the Japanese house located in the Huntington Library, Art Collections, and Botanical Gardens. The firm recently completed the Halfley House, designed by Richard Neutra in 1953. Kelly lectures for the School of Architecture's Heritage Conservation Summer Course and at conferences around the country. She's a member of the Board of Counselors for the USC School of Architecture, a member of the Urban Land Institute, the USC Architectural Guild, the California Preservation Foundation Board of Trustees, the Board of Directors for the Association for Preservation Technology International, APTI, and serves as co-chair for the APTI Technical Committee on Modern Heritage. And then Jenna Knudsen graduated from USC with a Bachelor in Architecture in 1997. She's an associate principal with Co-Architects in Los Angeles and has been immersed in the design and management of large-scale healthcare and academic projects in which she's embraced BIM-enabled integrated project delivery. Her recent work on major projects such as the Palomar Medical Center and the Health Sciences Education Building in Phoenix placed her at the leading edge of this pioneering practice model, and for which she was recognized by the AIA as a 2011 AIA Young Architect Award. Through regional and national speaking engagements, Jenna has advocated BIM as both a design and team integration tool. In addition to her Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Southern California, Jenna holds a Master of Science in Architecture and Urban Design from Columbia University, where she was awarded an Honor Award for Excellence in Design and a Willliam Kinne Traveling Fellowship. So let's give everybody a round of applause and welcome them to your seat. sure you can recognize everyone from those graduation photos I had up there, right?
So we will have to speak into the microphones. Thank you. And I have promised our panelists that all of them will have to speak at some point or another. So we'll see if this works. So I do have a question for all of you, and that is if you can talk a little bit about your memories of education, your educational experience here at USC, in any way, shape, or form that you desire. And we will start with Ena.
Well, I'd like to say, first of all, that it was the place has changed a lot since I was here. The school was much, much smaller. There was no Watt Hall. It was Harris Hall only. And all life centered around the courtyard in Harris Hall, which was really a terrific thing because it was shared by the School of Fine Arts as well as the School of Architecture, and everybody met in that courtyard. So there was this really vibrant life going on there. There was a lot of interaction between the faculty and the students. We had a lot of social events planned for the whole school that involved the faculty. It was a great faculty at that time. We had Buffstraub and Hansman, all three of them, Gregory Ain, Quincy Jones, and lots of other visiting faculty who came in and out of the school. And it was quite a wonderful experience. I didn't see specifically how many women were in the school at the time that I was there, but I don't remember very many, maybe 2 or 3 others, and I was the only woman in my class. So that was sort of what the situation was there then. There was a lot of emphasis on design, but also a lot of really technical work that we did. We all did several sets of working drawings for buildings that we had designed so that we had to make them work. We designed them and then had to really see what put them together. So that was really a terrific experience. I think that really prepared us pretty well for what we got when we got outside, at least in terms of the work that we were going to do.
You have a better memory of of being here than I do. It hasn't changed that much, actually, I don't think, since I've been here, except they added a floor to Watt Hall. I have very, very good memories of USC. I think you all know that the kind of studio culture of architecture is unique to architecture, and it creates really strong bonds. So I am still friends with quite a lot of my classmates. I think that I had the opportunity to study abroad in Italy when I was here, which was probably one of the best experiences. Really amazing opportunity to travel and learn in Europe. And I think if there's one thing that I feel like I didn't do since I left is I don't think I maintained good enough relationships with the professors. I think that there were some really great professors, many of whom are still here, and many whom only taught 1 or 2 semesters when I was here. So if I had a recommendation, I would suggest that you maintain relationships with your professors, and I think with social media that's a lot easier now these days.
So I graduated in 1974, which was a million years ago, and it was this building, and then halfway through my education they finished Watt Hall. And I think the biggest thing that happened was they put showers there in the basement, and I was living in a frat house, and I was the only girl in the frat house on Fraternity Row, so some mornings I couldn't get in the bathroom because someone else was already in there, so I would bring my stuff and shower. It was wonderful. So it saved me. It was, Teresa and I were in the same class, and there were 7 women and a total of 77 graduating students. So we were we were a minority. All of the students were very close. We were all very good friends. We took care of each other, and it was a very good atmosphere. It was interesting because Ena did working drawings. We were in a phase where USC was a design school, so we never did a set of working drawings. So when I graduated and I interviewed, they said, no, we want to hire Cal Poly grads. And I finally did get a job, and my first project was a set of working drawings. They let me design my own house, so I had the skills, so it did work. The courtyard was still a very important part of what we did, and it was a wonderful experience and good memories.
I graduated in 1982 and 1983. My year was one of the last years to have the option to do a 4 or 5 year degree, and I was determined to leave after 4 years, but Dean Harris convinced me to stay, and I too was able to travel abroad, study abroad in Italy, and that was definitely a high point of my time here at USC. I was also able to live in the Gamble House as a recipient of this Scholar in Residence program there, the first female recipient that they had selected since the program started in the 1960s. So that also was an amazing experience. I was accepted to the university, but I actually applied to fine arts. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I had a strong art background. I also had a strong math and science background, and the School of Architecture saw my application, and they approached me and asked me if I wouldn't consider architecture school, and they were recruiting women, and we're trying to get their numbers up. So it was an interesting experience that first year, because I was in class with students who had worked for architects, who had taken drafting for 4 years, had wanted to be architects all their lives, and I was trying to figure out how to get the lead out of my mechanical pencil. And so by the second year, the communication skills were finally evening up. I was able to relay my ideas. The playing field was a little more even, and I realized that so many of those students who had wanted to be architects all their lives were disappointed. It wasn't what they wanted and expected, and I didn't have expectations, so I wasn't disappointed. I was thoroughly getting engaged with the program and supported by professors, and I think that was a real benefit for me not to have those expectations. So it was a good experience. Like the other graduates more recent to me, it was definitely design focused. Very little time spent on construction documents. I think the most technical instruction I received was from Mark Schuler when he started the business science program. And the school did prepare me to be a designer with communication skills, how to present ideas, and also how to take criticism when I presented my ideas, and how to make the most of that and work upon that, build upon it. But socially, I don't feel I was prepared for the workplace, and we'll probably get into that a little bit later.
Well, as Chris said, we had 7 women in our class, and we thought we were doing really well. The year before us had, I think, 2 women out of 40-something graduating class. And I remember a few years after we graduated, going to a party and finding out that the current classes were like a third women. So I feel like we were kind of on a leading edge there. I agree with the comment about the studio culture, because comparing like my husband's experience, my child's experience, other friends, the collegiality in the architecture department and the studio system is unique in a college experience. And we were joking earlier, Chris and I, about our memories of Mark Schiller, who was our de facto structures instructor, because none of us could understand the professor that we had. So Mark would run our study groups, and that's how we got through structures.
this is a question for any of you, whoever wants to speak to this. Would you say your education prepared you to what you encountered in the workplace? If anybody wants to speak to that.
I will, yes. I would say that technically, in terms of design and doing the actual work in the office, it did, but it certainly didn't in any way prepare me for what I encountered politically. In other words, in school, all you have to do is do what you're told. You're given problems and you have to solve them, but nobody tells you what to do when you get out. And when you're in an office situation, you need to understand what the whole culture of that particular office is, and how things work, and how people interact. And it's a very different kind of a culture. And there are things going on that you often don't understand, and it's a very difficult thing to get into at first. And that was certainly true of the teaching situation. Faculty member, that's another whole area that nobody prepares you for. It's a whole other situation with politics and just ways of having to get along. And I think that maybe one of the things that I missed was that, as a woman, was that I didn't get mentored in quite the same way, either in offices or as a faculty member as the men did, because they were automatically buddies. And I always felt as a student that I was one of the boys. Now, I wasn't, but I guess I had that delusion, and we all acted as though we were all on the same team, and I think we were. It was very collegial and great, and all these years later, I'm still really good friends, as you are, but it's been a much longer time with maybe 5 or 6 of the people that I went to school with, and that's pretty extraordinary. That's off on another subject. But anyway, in answer to the question, simply, it was yes and no. In certain ways, very much, and in other ways, not at all.
Anybody else would like to speak to this?
I don't think architecture school prepares you for the architecture world, but I don't think that it's not supposed to. I mean, architecture, we still have to go on and do an apprenticeship, so that's part of our education. Maybe that'll change. Other countries do it differently. You can graduate and be an architect. Here you can't. I don't think it prepared me well for business, and I don't know that architecture schools still do business education very well, and that should become, excuse me, more of a part of the curriculum. Professional practice class was all we got for business, and I really think that should be expanded upon. I've taught that class. I taught that at Cal Poly Pomona, and I think it needs to be a 2-year program. I don't know I don't think it is yet here. It's still 1. So, but I think USC prepared me very well. What they do best is they create leadership. And I think they created leadership skills, which I took out there, and I was energetic and ready to take off and do whatever I had to do. And that they gave me that. And it was a good education in that way.
Anybody else, or should? Let me just mention that we have on the far side, just for your mental map, Ena Dubnoff, graduated in 1960. Then we have Jenna Knudsen, 97, right? Then we've got Christine Lampert, 74. And then we have Kelly McLeod, 83, 84. And we have Therese Gaines, 74s. All right. So let me ask you, what really excites you in your work? What kinds of projects? Was there a project that was perhaps a watershed in your thinking, or just really exciting as a project? If anybody can address that.
To me, the most exciting is the next one.
There we go. So she starts one and she's already looking forward to the next one. I like it.
I love the planning process of starting a project. Scoping it out, and then hopefully eventually seeing it come to skin and bones.
I can address that too. My first project I briefly mentioned when I was talking a minute ago is that I worked for my first architecture firm, and they told me to go design my own house. I mean, it was for a client, but it was a spec house, so it wasn't, the client didn't really care too much other than he wanted a certain amount of square footage, he wanted ocean views, and so that was I went and climbed the tree on the lot so I could see where the water view was, and then I built the house so that the living room was upstairs, and it was really amazing to be offered that opportunity. And I always feel like as I've moved through life, I'm always finding different opportunities. I think it's like the next project is always going to be the most exciting, but I've always tried so many different ways of approaching architecture. I mean, teaching. I remember the first day I was driving up to USC, probably about 6 years ago now, to begin teaching, and it was the most glorious feeling in the world to know that I was coming back to teach. And so, you know, there's just many different wonderful experiences in life, and it's a great career.
One of the projects that was a slide under my work was a large hospital project, Palomar. And when I came back from New York, I ended up coming back to the same office I had worked at before, co-architect, because the project was really interesting and sold to me as one that was going to use evidence-based design. And so the idea that that there was actual evidence that architecture and design could influence healing and the way that health care providers provided care was really amazing, and there was something about that project, and my role on it was a kind of what was called a project coordinator. There was something about that project that just sort of took on a life of its own, and we adopted building information modeling, integrated project delivery, and I think it was a trajectory of my career up to that point, which was that as a team, we can do better than as individuals. And so to the question of your previous question about if school prepares you, I think it doesn't necessarily prepare you to work in a team environment. There's a lot of I in design and architecture. And but what I have found really interesting and keeps me motivated is the idea of working with many different people, whether they're consultants or contractors or other designers, and taking the sort of best value that each person has to bring to that, and then creating an architecture that's better because of it.
Yeah, I would like to pick up on that team thing, if that's
On which theme? Which theme?
the team.
Team.
Working in the team. Because when I went to school, we were encouraged to work in teams. In fact, we were given projects that were team projects, where we had a design to do, and 4 or 5 of us had to do the work together. And that was wonderful preparation for the kind of teamwork that you need to do when you're out in the world. And I think as a result of that, I have always worked in teams. There's very little work that I've done alone. And I've always either hooked up with other offices, which I continue to do to this day, or worked with not large groups, but with groups of people sort of as equals. And it's the way I prefer to work, and it was part of my training, and I feel very lonely when I work alone. And I'm much more creative when I'm working with more people. The ideas flow much better, and it's much more exciting. So I think we were very fortunate in that way to have that experience even before we get out of school.
Well, I agree with Ena on working with teams and collaborating, and with the type of work that I do in heritage conservation, the projects do require multidisciplinary teams, and I find that very exciting to collaborate with people who are leaders in their disciplines, and to share ideas and bring expertise to the table, and continue to learn with every project, not just about the project itself, but from your colleagues, and that is very, very exciting to me, much more so than working as a sole practitioner on my own. And my career has had an interesting journey in that heritage conservation wasn't mentioned as a career path when I was here at USC. My thesis advisor, Stefanos Palazois, did suggest that I do a cultural I did a cultural center in Pasadena using Julia Morgan's YWCA building, a building that now is, 30-some years later, is finally looking at some rehabilitation. It's been sitting there empty all this time. So I did do a rehabilitation project, but I didn't start my practice in the 80s focused on preservation. I actually started my practice doing many different types of projects and many new buildings from the ground up. But the element of conservation kept coming up in the projects, and I realized how much I enjoyed it and how interesting it was. And at this point of my career, it's very exciting to me that heritage conservation is becoming mainstream to the practice of architecture, where it really hasn't been in years past. And it's more than just preserving buildings or structures, it's really about preserving place and tradition and culture. And that to me is very, very exciting. I'm on a team brought into a large team that's doing a new civic center for a major city here in Southern California. And I was brought on specifically to make sure that this project is designed for a specific place, not a project that could be placed anywhere in the United States, in the world, any city, but really specific to this city's culture, tradition, and history. And to me, that's very exciting. I'm also working in rural areas where the sense of place and the conservation of place and tradition is very important. And so, so this new perspective on heritage conservation coming into the mainstream of architecture and planning and landscape design is very exciting.
Well, given the team or collaborative nature of architectural design, do you think that women use a different language to communicate, perhaps communicate in a distinctive way? I shouldn't limit it to language, from men within the process? No, they don't. We all speak the same.
I have an opinion. I always have an opinion. I can give it. I can start the process rolling. I think we do. I think I do. I think that we have subtly different leadership skills, that we tend to be a little more nurturing. I like to run a project where everybody's kept fairly civilized and relatively happy, and that and I think that's an important skill that it really works. I had an interesting conversation with my husband last weekend when we were riding the ferry between Lantau Island and Hong Kong Central. We had a half an hour of time, and I showed him this list of questions, and it was interesting because he's a architect, now a real estate developer, building retail centers throughout China, and he said, I prefer to hire women. He goes, hey, I don't want to insult any men. He said they're so much smarter and they understand things so quickly, and his staff is half women. And I'm like, oh, that's wonderful. But, we're I don't know, maybe we grasp things differently. I think we do communicate slightly differently. So, and yet we still have to jump into the old boys world and be part of it. So, we can't be too feminine. You've still got to be tough.
Okay. Anybody else has a thought, or should we segue into another women-related question? Well, let me ask you, is there anything you think that female graduates with architecture should prepare for, if there's anything in particular, and are there career pathways that perhaps you can recommend to women in architecture?
I'm not in the design end of the architecture. I'm in the facilities, and I think that's a great alternative channel. You get to deal with lots of different people. I mean, the teamwork approach, you're hiring architects, hiring consultants, working with users. I just think it's an overlooked alternative.
Architecture is a wonderful discipline that can be applied to so many different career paths, and it's been interesting to watch classmates and recent graduates and the different career paths they have taken. But the discipline is so strong in problem solving and using innovative ideas to solve problems and creativity to solve problems. And so that is a discipline that can be applied to many different avenues. And my recommendation would be to follow your passion and what truly interests you. And if you haven't selected that yet, then keep your eyes open to what's out there.
I have to just throw in, I agree totally. That's the reality. It's whatever, we're all different, and there's so many opportunities, and whatever feels comfortable, go for it.
Yes, problem-solving profession can be applied in a variety of ways, not just by women, but by men too. To still circle back to the issue of women, since this is a panel on USC Women in Architecture, women do get asked, and you probably have been asked, how do you balance life and profession? And it is a gendered question in the sense that men probably do not get asked that question, or very rarely. Do you think it is still a relevant question, given your experience in the profession? Is it still a relevant question?
I think it's a question that can be asked equally of men and women these days. When I was a young professional, I had a USC alum, an older architect, tell me, never talk about your children or your family to your clients because they don't care. And I took that to heart, and I didn't. And then I noticed it was the men around the conference table who were pulling out pictures of their children and talking about their weekends. And I think it's my perception now is that it is more balanced of how the home life is handled. And I know with my own employees, male and female, I ask them about their personal responsibilities, their home responsibilities, and try to respect that we all have lives outside of the office and have balancing to do.
I just want to say that I think that that's a question that we need to ask the politicians, because I think what's really needed is more support for both women and men, with support services that would allow everybody to be able to have to be able to work and have a decent family life. Things like childcare, for instance, that should be available to everybody, and better transportation, and just things that would make everybody's lives easier. Because lives are really difficult these days because everybody's trying to do so much, and the demands are so great in every different direction that I just think we all need more support.
It was tough. I agree. I could not tell anybody when I was interviewing for a job that I had any. My personal life, I would not breathe a word of it. I remember I was a corporate architect for a big company, and I remember looking at the baby spit on my jacket going, and nobody had a clue that I had a baby at home, and they didn't want to know. And I, too, when I've had my firms, I've always been very encouraging of everybody to, if they have to take off and go to their children's events, to do it. I think that's important. We have a long way to go. I remember being pregnant and taking off for maternity leave 33 years ago, and then getting laid off before I could come back to work. And, of course, they kept the people that they'd hired after me, and it hurt. It hurt a lot. Yeah, it was awful. I have a friend in Hong Kong who was an executive with Oracle. He's a tech guy, and he just got 5 months leave for his new baby, full paid, 5 months. I mean, wouldn't that be wonderful if we had those kind of benefits? So we have a ways to go, but we've come a long ways. We've come very far. So just keep moving forward.
As Trudi mentioned in her introduction, the area of heritage conservation has many women. But there are also discussions within the architecture profession as to why women leave the profession to this day. And it is a difficult profession. I would imagine there are quite a few men who leave the profession too. But do you have any thoughts or perspectives on that? Why heritage conservation might be more attractive to women? Why do women leave the profession?
I think picking up on the last discussion, I think family pressures and financial pressures are an important factor. I think probably the time devotion in a normal architectural practice can be overwhelming. I have a friend who has a degree in architecture from a university in Mexico, and she works as a masseuse because that fit her family needs at the time. So I think it's still an issue.
I know Trudi wants me to take heritage conservation question here, and I was actually stumped by this when I got this question of why heritage conservation has attracted more women historically, and it is interesting because when I did my thesis project, I was introduced to 4 women who were the leaders of the preservation community here in Los Angeles. And one of those was Christy McAvoy, who many of you may know from teaching here at USC and her firm Historic Resources Group. And the other one was Linda Dishman, who's now the executive director of Los Angeles Conservancy and really the voice of preservation in Southern California. And Linda was at the city of Pasadena, I believe, and Christy was at the Conservancy. But it's interesting to me that here 30 plus years later, these 4 women who I did meet in the early 80s are still leaders in the preservation community. And why the attraction to women really did throw me for an answer. So I surveyed my firm, my office team, and sent around the question, and several times the word nurturing came up, which I thought was very interesting, and that came from both men and women in my office. Also that heritage conservation is a quieter profession than mainstream architecture as it has been historically. It's not about me or my work, it's about our work. It's not even about the here and now necessarily. It's about what came before us and what's going to come after us. And so I thought that was really interesting to hear from people of all ages, many younger people that are at my office, what their thoughts were on that question.
Okay.
It's your turn.
I'll take the people leaving question. What I can say is when I graduated from USC, I don't think we were 50-50, but it was pretty close. So there was a pretty equal amount of women. And then when I went to mainstream architecture in the profession, it was less, but still pretty good ratio. And as I've continued in the field of architecture and risen in the ranks, it's less and less. So I have many less peers than I had. And when I look at why they left, I think it's a variety of reasons. Some of them left Los Angeles, some of them left architecture, some of them followed their partners somewhere else, some of them went to work for owners, some went into fashion design. But I think a lot of it is looking for more flexibility. Traditionally, if you go to that studio culture, architecture is long hours, and that is very difficult when it comes to having a family. And I'm married to an architect, so we're 2 architects trying to both be successful architects and have a family life. So I think it's really a challenge. But to the previous question, I think that it is becoming less of a women's issue and more of an issue about sort of family, and you know, how do you make the profession, how do we still do good architecture, but allow for and acknowledge that people have life outside of the office.
I don't know. I think it was all said. I think you know, the answers were all really excellent, and I can just agree. Did you? Yeah.
I'd like to open this to any questions that you might have in the audience. Students, faculty, alums? Yes. So navigating career pinch points.
Well, I think, yeah, in my case, I was gung-ho. I went full force, got my license, and then I had the baby while I was getting my license, but I finished that part first, and then I started the family. And then I was a corporate architect, and that was probably better than being in a studio environment because I had 9 to 5 hours, but it was a tough job. And then I solved the dilemma by starting my own firm and being my own boss. I always remember in the movie Gone with the Wind where Tara says, "I'll never be hungry again," and she holds up a root. And it's like, I'm going to just do this myself because I'm tired of being laid off when things are slow, and I'm tired of having to work all night. And so that's how I solved it. I have a lot of friends who chose the corporate world, the architecture corporate world, and they didn't make the same choices I made. They probably became more successful and made more money than I ever will, but I feel like I've balanced it pretty well.
Well, I solved part of it by not having any children, so I didn't have that demand, and it allowed me a lot more freedom to move around a lot. I didn't have to support children, so my financial needs were also less, so that I didn't have to follow the money, and I could make maybe more selfish choices along the way, so that I managed to do a lot of different kinds of work and a lot of different kinds of things in different circumstances, from working for big corporate firms to working for smaller firms to eventually my own firm, not working in architecture for periods of time to do some other things. I was a printmaker and had a printmaking studio for about 3 years in there somewhere. And I had the freedom to be able to do those things. And then eventually my own firm, and finally with a group of other women becoming developers of affordable housing. And still continuing to do affordable housing and other things as well. So I'm not saying that's the right choice for everybody, but I think it really was the right choice for me, and it made my life very interesting, and I would say pretty easy, actually.
Well, I am navigating one of those pinch points right now because I became a mother about 4 years ago, and it's very difficult, but I think that the missing 32% statistics were kind of sobering, but at the same time, I feel like it's sparked a discussion within offices that are inclusive of men and women, and so in that way, I feel very optimistic that that firms are actively thinking about. What are we doing to hinder ourselves from creating female leaders? So, stay tuned.
I think looking at varieties of resources. In my case, I had a child that I was working at Stanford at the facilities department, so I had stand for childcare, which is hard to beat. So, you know, I think again, it goes back to having, to searching out what the options are.
It sounds like having a support network is important for anybody. Any other questions from members?
Yeah, I have a question about, you know, the leaders in the community in architecture, and what are we doing to each and every of the pitch points that we hold on to that? What are we doing for the future of female architects so they don't have to, it could ease their way into leadership? Any suggestions what we can do?
That's the question of the day.
The question of the day, the question of the decade is easing the pinch points and foster growth in leadership.
I think that not enough's being done. I think that the point about it's not just women, though, it's also men and their lives and leading balanced lives and making that more important in the field of architecture. I think that's very important. I think we do need to promote women, but at the same time, we need to promote all sorts of diversity. I mean, it's been a white man's field for a long time, so there's a lot of other people that belong there. And I just think we all have to be more aware that there's so much that we all have to offer, and that that diversity is making architecture a much more interesting world and maybe more profitable. And if that's what it takes, money is what talks. It's like, you know, somehow that message needs to get out there that we can make you more profitable because we are smart, we're different, we've got ideas, and I don't know how to make that happen. But but in the case of my husband who hires women, it's because we are smart, we are profitable. So when that word gets out, hopefully that's what will promote it and make it happen.
I would, on diversity, I think one of the things that we can do is be talking about it, and it's okay to talk about it. But if there's a really great YouTube video, if you Google unconscious bias. So Google did a study of why there are so few women in Silicon Valley. And it's a really interesting presentation of their findings about the biases that we all have. And it talks about gender, but it also just sort of generally talks about diversity, and that we are comfortable with people who are like us, right? And so if you kind of acknowledge that and look for ways to open the door to people who might not be exactly like you, then I think that's a big step.
Having a firm of 12 people, a small firm, my goal is to lead by example. And not only with hiring practices, but also with our, our consultants and who we collaborate with. And in our office, we do talk about family. And we are aware of each other's responsibilities and home life and who needs to be where, when. And I try to lead by example that, yes, I do have a life outside the office, that I'm not here 24/7. And whether that's attending lectures or tours or doing professional affiliations, volunteer work, but bringing that out in the open in the office and leading by example.
Anybody else?
I'm always curious about how it is, I assume, because of all the communications we see in various schools and departments, that their career fairs and the communications being made on graduation, so that that's much better because then, again,
So for those of you who are students here, are you working on your resume? Yes? No? Who thinks they're working on their resume? Raise your hand. All right. Who thinks they'll get there at some point? Little hands. All right.
The question would be also, is there a class that's specifically helping you with that? Is there, or are you doing it on your own? I know in professional practice you get some of that, and Mina, you teach that, yeah.
I was going to ask how many of you are planning to attend the career fair. Because I know when I sat on the Architectural Guild board, we were so disappointed that more people didn't come, more students didn't come out.
So Doug will be next. You had.
I have trouble hearing you. I think the microphones are on. Some of you have very soft voices, so hold the microphone close. And audience members, if you have questions.
Chad, are we still on the question of kind of mentoring and professionalization of students? Okay. Sure, why not?
Actually, our school is actually been voted by the accreditation committee as being one of the best professional practice places in the country. We have consistently been lauded for what we're doing, and what we're doing is we actually bring in a lot of speakers from outside the profession. We hope to do more panels like this, actually. We bring people in to teach them about leadership, branding. We also bring them in. I brought the building department in, but they're closed this semester because of the fire, so they can't come this semester. We also bring in people who specialize in marketing, communication, and I work very closely with development funding and development, and we try to do more to. Right now, we are integrating the final assignment. We call it a specification assignment, but it's teamwork. We get them to work together in teams for their final project, so they get a taste of integrated project delivery. We have lectures on integrated project delivery. We have lectures on the internship development program. We have a lot of information that we focus on, like pretty much everything that isn't covered in the design studio, which is it's not enough time, but at least what we do is we expose them to people who are involved in the industry, and they get access to them. So a lot of the students that come in are more than ready to talk to the students about their specialty. And then there's, career fair is actually well known for being a really awesome fair. And Michael and I are always available to younger students about, like, if they want to know about specific aspects of fairness.
Inma, did you want to add, and then I'll go to.
I actually have a question to the panelists. Most of you are practicing independently, having your own firm or being partner of practice. My question is that being an architect from the angle of from your angle, as a woman architect,
So because the dean did not have a microphone to eat, just in case those of you in the back didn't hear, I have no idea. The question basically is, if I may summarize, the advantages of setting up practice, since the majority of the panelists have their own practice.
Well, as Christine mentioned, family life and own practice, and that doesn't mean working less hours. It probably means working more hours, but you may have a baby on your lap or in the seat next to you. I started my practice and a few years before I started having children, and all three of my children came to the office the first 4 months of life, and everyone was very helpful in the office, and they had when I was on the phone or when I had meetings, they would get in their car seat and come with me. And I was very fortunate to be able to do that. And then there were times when I wasn't able to make events, like working parents can't always be everywhere that they want to be, and the prices that are paid for that. But I do have to say, now that my children are young adults, it gives me great pleasure that they not only know what I do, but they take great pride in what I do and my work, and they recognize it. So I think the payment that was made was definitely worth it for all of us, I'm hoping. So the advantage was more of a personal advantage. I don't think it was an advantage professionally. As someone said, I think I could have probably been positioned in a larger corporation and a higher paying position, maybe larger projects, but totally fulfilled with the work I have done and the career path I have taken. But there was a great advantage just to me personally to be able to do more of the things that I wanted to do in addition to working full time.
Really just build on that. That was a good answer. And similar to my life, I felt that there was a glass ceiling. There was definitely a glass ceiling. I wasn't getting promoted in the corporate world. And so by starting my own firm, I was the principal architect. I was the head of the firm, and I could hire who I wanted, and I had a lot of women. I've always had a lot of women on my staff. And we were very sensitive to our personal lives. But everybody, we all work so hard. I'm not crying, I'm coughing. Choking. But I probably live, breathe, eat architecture. My children were raised looking at architecture. Poor things, I've dragged them all over the world to look at old historic buildings and new ones. But I think being able to have that freedom, that's why I wanted to have my own firm. And it's that freedom of choice and to live the way I wanted to live. So, similar answer, I think.
Similar answer. I think the freedom is a very big part of it. That you can make your own choices. And for me, the main choice was the type of work that I wanted to do, and I was able to choose projects and clients that fit with what I care about and what I believe in. I've done mostly affordable housing and work for social service agencies, and I really care about the work that they're doing and the people that they serve, and that's meant a lot to me. And interestingly enough, because of that choice, a lot of my clients and the people I have direct contact with and work with have been women, because women tend to go into those areas of work, and it's been very gratifying to do that.
I have one more thing I wanted to that triggered a thought. I've attracted, as a woman-owned architecture firm, I attract different types of clients than a male-oriented architecture firm. So there are projects that I will never be asked to work on, but then there are projects where people do seek us out because we do things a little differently.
Planned Parenthood was one of my clients, for instance, and they were looking for a woman.
I can't answer that question because I don't have my own firm, but I did want to address the comment before about the firm fair. I don't know if you guys know this, but you are better positioned than any class graduating in probably the last 7 years. I think the recession is officially over. It's very, very busy, and a lot of firms are hiring, so you should go to the firm fair, because I think there'll be a lot of firms represented.
It breaks my heart to tell you that we have time for only one more question. I know there were several hands, and I promised I'll pick on you, but I'm afraid there's just time for one. So who wants to ask a question? Who wants to jump in? You already had your chance. Somebody else. Come on. Young lady in green, did you want to ask something or you wanted to comment? Yeah. Well, thank you very much for participation. I should say that when we contacted our panelists, none of them put up any barriers. They all said, yes, we want to do this. And it was wonderful. So thank you very much. And thank you.
Awarding the alumni of the year to a woman for the first time in her history, and that is Kelly. Thanks for coming.